panel. So welcome to the panel, and I'm really happy to introduce Mykola as the leader of this research group, or how can I say?
Yeah, I think that it's fine. At least in the case of the Holocaust research, yes, I'm probably taking the lead of our guys. Yeah. So yes.
So the other guys, the other colleagues are really from many other disciplines. So Mykola Makhortykh is a postdoctoral researcher at the Institute of Communication and Media Studies, University of Bern. His current research focuses on how the representation of the traumatic past, in particular the Holocaust, is influenced by online platforms and algorithmic systems. He is an editor of the journal Studies in Russian, Eurasian, and Central European New Media, and of the book series Transdisciplinary Trauma Studies at the Gruyter Publishing House. And his research on the relationship between memory, trauma, and technology recently appeared in journals such as First Monday, Holocaust Studies, Memory Studies, and Visual Communication. So Mykola, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Eva. I would actually stand, if nobody was mind. Oh, and can I actually get the wonderful stick? Yes. I really like this wonderful stick so much.
Computational science starts with wonderful sticks.
Yes, exactly. So thank you very much, Eva, once more for the great introduction. It's really a great pleasure to be here and also present the work that we are doing together with my wonderful colleagues, Alexander Ullmann from Zurich, Roberto Lohr from GESIS, and Yuhi Kulshwester. I really should try to train more my pronunciation of Yuhi's surname from the University of Constance. So, as you actually noted, what I'm going to talk today, as well as our other wonderful speakers in the panel, is indeed the impact of the digital technology on the Holocaust remembrance. And in the case of our research group, we're specifically focusing on the algorithms. And we definitely also heard some things about algorithms in the previous day, but I still would like to actually start with a very brief discussion of what we're actually understanding when we're thinking about algorithms in the case of our laboratory. So pretty much, we understand algorithms together with our colleagues as a sequences of instructions which are used to fulfill a particular task. And usually when we think about algorithms, we think about something very complicated, some big data, some power computers, some very, very complicated computations. But generally, the idea of the algorithm is relatively simple. You can think about the process of cleaning your teeth as an algorithm. You're actually having a sequence of instructions which you better not to fail if you actually want to clean your teeth properly. You're actually taking a toothbrush, then you're actually putting some paste on it, and you're putting it into your mouth, and you're moving it, ideally for some time. My dentist always tells me that I should do it at least 10 minutes per day. And then you actually pull it out, very important. So as you basically see, you basically have a sequences of the actions. So basically those actions form a sequence which actually allows us to get some result, hopefully our healthy teeth. Pretty much, algorithms can be really very helpful for humans. Probably all of us doing a lot of algorithms in our everyday life, but they're even more helpful for the machines, because honestly machines are much stupider than humans. It's very good, and I really like to tell it when machines actually do not hear me. So pretty much machines actually very dependent in their functionality on the sequences of the algorithm. So basically the sequences of the commands which we actually give to machine in order to achieve a certain task. However, what is really wonderful about algorithms is that those individual algorithms, relatively simple tasks, can actually be combined into more complex algorithms. They can actually shape and form much more complex systems which are capable of fulfilling much more complicated tasks. Really fascinating tasks, if you would ask me. Think, for instance, about the self-driving car. When I was a child, I never thought that there would be a self-driving car. My brain was too limited to actually imagine its possibility. However, it's actually possible nowadays through the algorithms. And pretty much one particular class of algorithmic systems that actually is the focus of our work, together with my wonderful colleagues, is information-related systems. So basically the algorithms which explicitly deal with the information. And you can definitely think about some algorithms which fulfill this task, for instance, the Facebook newsfeed, the recommender systems on the YouTube, when actually watching YouTube, and YouTube kindly suggests you something, or for instance, search engines, which are actually the main focus of what I would be talking about today. Now, why those wonderful things matter? Why actually information algorithms matter? Pretty much what we're actually arguing together with colleagues, and what actually also other even more smarter people argue, that today we're actually having a very unique information ecosystem. which is actually defined by something that we actually did not experience, let's say 20 years ago, 30 years ago, which is the abundance of content.
Can you go to the microphone?
Oh, yeah.
Sorry,
Absolutely zero worries here, well, thank you. So I will actually try to kind of stick myself to this particular point in the space. So pretty much we really have abundance of content, which is both related to the content about the Holocaust as well as other information topics. We really never had that much content available, I would argue, in the digital form. Why is it so? First of all, thanks to our wonderful heritage institutions, which really put extensive effort into the digitizing things. It's really brilliant. But also we're actually having some more content which is coming out, not necessarily from the institutions. We're definitely having a lot of reports on the Holocaust coming from the journalists. We're also having a lot of reflections coming from the individual users. Unfortunately, we're also having quite some denialism coming out, which is also a part of this very, very big abundance of the content. Now just a small illustration, and I definitely know that Vaila already saw this when I was giving a similar presentation in Kazan Dusan, and probably it is actually not that very seen here, but let me just really tell you what is happening on this slide. Basically here on the slide, you see the Google search results for the query the Holocaust, which I actually conducted in 2021. And what is really important here is the number, which is actually not that very well seen, but I can read it to you. So basically in 2021, we have 58 million results for the query the Holocaust, which is massive. Even if I would like to read probably 1 million of those results, I would spend the rest of my life actually reading those results, which is not very productive. I probably would never get a tenure if I would actually do this. However, when we're actually looking at 2022, we actually see that the situation becomes even more problematic or even more promising, depending on how you actually look on this. Because when we're actually searching for the Holocaust in 2024, we're actually having 1 billion results and 690 million results. So you basically see a massive increase from the 58 million to more than 1 billion results. Probably next year, we will actually have more than 2 billion results when we're searching for the Holocaust. And this is beautiful. We never had so many content about the Holocaust, but there are some buts. So pretty much, first of all, as I already noted, it's really not possible to read through all this content. We are only humans. We cannot really operate through the 2 billion results or even 1 billion results. Under those conditions, we really need algorithms in order to help us make choices. So basically, the choices which are usually search engines help us to do are, for instance, what information shall we look at first? What items might be best to buy in the case of the other classes of the information algorithms? And pretty much, algorithms really allows us to make those choices without trying to go through the 1 billion results on the Holocaust. Also sitting in our comfortable chairs, we definitely do not need to go to the museums or to the libraries. I will definitely encourage this, but sometimes it is difficult, especially when you have COVID. We're also having data based on the billions of points, which is fascinating. And then algorithms are actually able to produce results just in a second. So it really takes Google only a few seconds in order to actually generate the list of the outputs sorted under the certain logic. And actually tell us, okay, you probably want to start reading about this source when you're interested in the Holocaust. Now, what are the concerns? When I'm actually thinking about the impact of the information algorithm, I often like to use the example of the GPS that we're actually having on our smartphones. And as probably quite some people here would agree, especially Tomasz, who was actually bringing me to the conference venue yesterday. It's very handy to have GPS, because actually when you're going to the town you're actually not very comfortable with, or the place where you actually never was, then GPS actually allows you to actually find your way. It's definitely not the case when you know the content or the things that you are dealing with, but when you're actually not very aware about the things, then actually GPS really makes you very dependent on the thing. So if you're actually taking this metaphor and applying it to the Holocaust, then we can actually, again, pretty well agree that we as Holocaust experts are really knowing when we're actually interested in finding information. We know the sources. We do not necessarily need to Google the Holocaust in order to understand that there are really good sources of information we can actually teach to our students. However, there is a problem that not everyone is an expert in the Holocaust. It would be really wonderful if it would not be the case, but we are still very far from this wonderful point in time. And pretty much the problem is amplified by the fact that, as I already noted, not all of those billion results are of the same qualities. We have a lot of crap in the results. It's very sad reality. And also we know that the whole situation of really having the majority of the population who are not necessarily expert in the topic A, and also having a potentially dubious types of the information is further amplified by the situation when individuals are highly trust search engines. And it was really very interesting for me to learn that, for instance, based on the Edelman Trust Barometer 2021, people actually trust search engines more than the legacy media. So at some point we start trusting journalists less than actually our algorithms, which is fascinating for me. And also we're knowing, based on our other strand of research, which was actually focused on the tracking of the information behavior, that individuals really very rarely go beyond the very first page of the results. So when you're actually having people Googling for something, they usually stick to the very first page of results and usually to the first or to the second option in the ranking. And it creates a situation when the matter of the information equality really becomes very important, when you know that the majority of population actually never goes beyond the first 10 results and actually sticks to the first 2 results, then it's a problem that the first 2 results are really bad. It's really a massive issue, I would argue. So what we're actually doing in order to understand if it is an issue or if it is not, pretty much what we are doing together with my wonderful colleagues in our lab is algorithmic audit. An algorithmic audit is the process of examining the functionality of automated decision-making. Again, think about the search engines. There are definitely different approaches. We can actually rely on the system API, so basically the data provided by the company, but then we always have a problem. Do we actually trust the company? What actually, if company wants to lie to us? What if company actually doesn't provide us good enough data? Then we can actually try to involve humans in order to crowdsource. So we can actually ask people, okay, dear people, can you please go and Google the Holocaust? And we, for instance, paying you $1 because it's pretty much digital capitalism and we are trying to exploit you. Or we can actually go for the robots. And pretty much what we're doing in our lab is robots. I'm really a very big fan of robots. Pretty much why we're actually working with robots, whom we're actually sending to Google things. There are definitely several reasons. First of all, robots do not get tired. I definitely would love to actually have a robot writing my articles. I probably would become it much more productive. But robots also having definitely better memory than me. And finally, robots can actually be better controlled and require less money than humans. Very good, I would say, reason to actually use them. We also conducted quite a number of recent audits in the recent years. So we, for instance, looked at the representation of race and technological innovation. We looked at how search engines represent migration, political elections. And then we also looked recently at curation at the visual content about the Holocaust. And if you're interested in, definitely visit the wonderful blog post by Wiki, and also definitely consider writing for Wiki too. I definitely would greatly encourage you. And now, as I already noted, we started looking at the visual content about the Holocaust. If you're interested, check the blog. And also, if you're interested in a lot of detail, check my article on the first Monday. And what we actually wanted to do for our study here, we actually were interested in the text search. And pretty much what we did for this project, we conducted an agent-based auditing of 4 major search engines, Bing, DuckDuckGo, Google, and Yandex. I hope that the majority here of people here actually know those search engines. If you don't know Yandex, it's really the Russian giant. It's basically the Russian Google, which is really important, especially right now when the Google is kind of in not a very good position in Russia, and probably it would become in a voice position. So pretty much what we did, we actually had 2 rounds of the data collection in February 2020 and May 2021. We used a different number of agents, mostly because of the budgetary reasons. We actually had less money in May 2021. It's a big pity, but it happens in academia. And then we actually deployed those agents in Chrome and Firefox on the clean center source machines. And if you would be really interested in the methodology, just ask me some questions. I would not really be bothering you with terrible computer science stuff. What actually our agents did, what our robots did, they searched for the word Holocaust in English and Russian, and then extracted HTMLs of the pages with the search results. And then we also made sure that actually the continuous searches didn't affect each other. Then what we did in terms of the data analysis, so for the reasons I already noted, we focused on the first page of the search results. So we basically looked at the top 10 search results per agent. In the case of the DuckDuckGo, it was a bit difficult because it actually has this dynamic kind of loading. So we actually just took the first 10 results for the DuckDuckGo. Together, we extracted 197 unique links for 2 periods, for February and for May. And those were unique across agent groups per agent, per period, per language. So between groups, there could be duplicates. And then we actually looked at the distribution of the unique links across agents. which actually is pretty interesting because it actually shows that there is some randomization between the agents, which actually is the reason why we're actually going for the agents. Because even if you're searching your robots to search at the same time, at the same conditions, at the same kind of operating system, using the same queries, there is still some randomization involved. So search engines actually try to randomize the results, probably to actually find the ways to sell to actually buy your time better. They actually want to spend you more time on the search engine, so they're actually using different kinds of rankings and different selections of the results, and then seeing, okay, this kind of results actually makes users spend more time on the page. We are going for this one. And then pretty much what we did, we used qualitative content analysis of the results. For now, we used one coder, namely myself, but we're definitely having more people involved in order to address potential bias as well as calculate intercoder reliabilities. And for now, we actually focused on the type of resources as well as page functions, but also some more specific interpretations. And now we're definitely showing you some results. Okay, so what we're actually seeing here. So first of all, we went for the traditional kind of analysis. We actually went to search and to look on the type of the sources which actually used when we actually looking at the top 10 results for the search engines for the Russian query on the bottom and also English query on the top. So basically we were able to identify several types of the sources. For instance, we identified alternative media, which is really, I would say, pretty dubious websites. I will show you some examples in the moment. There are definitely quite some education websites, so basically the sites related to the universities, but also heritage institutions, entertainment, journalistic media, basically all our wonderful journalistic outlets, political websites, reference work, which is really important because it's Wikipedia and all the kind of online encyclopedias, and finally social media. Now let me just quickly show you just very quickly some examples, and I will get back and actually tell you what we actually find interesting here. So in terms of reference work, Wikipedia, very expected result. This is actually an example of the alternative media. It's called the National Vanguard. You can basically get the idea of what they're actually working with when you actually seeing on the video preview for the left, which actually shows Mr. Zelensky with a subscription, the Jewish hand in the World War III. You probably get the idea what kind of alternative website it is. Yes, it's terrible, anti-Semitic, horrible alternative website. And just to remind you, it actually appeared in the first top results. It's a problem. And then we're actually having some journalistic media, for instance, the Tagesspiel, not that much of a problem. Now what we're actually seeing here and what we find interesting. So what we actually observe in the case of the selection of the sources for the top results, really the most important results, is that we can identify some kind of the, I would say, algorithmic philosophy in the case of the different search engines. For instance, in the case of the DuckDuckGo, which is this kind of thing. For the English, we really observe a lot of red. So DuckDuckGo really focuses a lot on the educational websites, so really academia-related websites. When you're actually looking at the Google, which is here, it is not necessarily the same. Google really puts a lot of emphasis on the journalistic website. So Google really sees journalists as really authorities to talk about the Holocaust, which I find very interesting. As well as, for instance, some politicians. And for instance, in the case of the Bing and Yandex, you really have a strong emphasis on the reference work. So different versions of the Wikipedia, Russian Wikipedia, English Wikipedia, German Wikipedia, sometimes you even have Kazakh or Tatar Wikipedia. They really like it very much. And when we're actually comparing the languages, and in the case of the Russian, we actually see some interesting changes. Because suddenly when we're actually looking for the results for the Holocaust in Russian, the amount of the reference work suddenly increases, which probably relates to the fact that there are not so necessarily that much well-indexed academic or journalistic outlets dealing with the Holocaust in Russian, but actually also has very serious implications for how Russians are getting informed about the Holocaust. Then what we did, we looked at the function of the source. And for the function of the source, we actually were interested what exactly this source actually deals in terms of the Holocaust. Does it, for instance, just give the definition of the Holocaust, how you actually find it in the Merriam-Webster dictionary? So what is a Holocaust, how you can actually correctly use the word in your academic writing? You can actually have episodes, which is basically specific aspects of the Holocaust. It can be a focus on the Holocaust in a specific country. It can be a specific event. It can be a specific personality, really broad category. And then we're actually having overview. So really this, I would say, meta-narrative of the Holocaust, how it started, how it went, how it actually ended. What we find interesting here is that, again, there are some, I would say, philosophical differences here. So first of all, almost in all cases, there is really very, very strong emphasis on actual overview. So when actually searching for the Holocaust and you're looking at the top results, you're getting the materials which actually communicate you the overview of the event. And it can be fine, why not? But there is a question, is it what we want to do? Because we're really talking so much about individual stories. We're talking so much about individual experience, about individual suffering. And then you're having an overview, Holocaust started in 1933 when evil Hitler came to power. Then everyone suffered, then everyone died, and then we built some monuments. Okay, let's go. Is it really what we want to have in the top results then? Then we actually looked at the background of the Holocaust. And here we actually checked what kind of the background, the sources that actually prioritized by the search engines narrate. And here we actually identified 3 categories. So it could be no background, so yellowish color. Basically, there is nothing before the Holocaust. You basically have the Holocaust starting, no prehistory, nothing. You have a narrow background. Evil Hitler comes in 1933, then you say having Kristallnacht, and then the Holocaust starts, very bad. And then actually having a broad background, which makes things interesting, because broad background actually tells, okay, the anti-Semitism didn't start and end with the Hitler. It was actually there for much longer time before the Hitler. And as you can see, there is definitely some interesting distribution here. And for instance, in February 2020, Google really puts a strong emphasis on no background information. It just really communicates to you about the events of how it understands Holocaust. It becomes slightly different in May 2021, but still Google is quite different here. And if, for instance, we're looking at the DuckDuckGo, then there is really strong emphasis on this broad background. So it really talks much more about the sources, which actually connect Holocaust to the really, I would say, long roots of the anti-Semitism in Europe. And it again raises a question, how we actually want those results to be? What kind of the background do we actually want algorithms to communicate? How we actually want our users who are not experts in Holocaust to understand the Holocaust when using search engines? And then probably the most fanciest thing, the Holocaust denial. So we definitely looked at whether or not sources actually deal with the Holocaust denial altogether. And if it is yellow, then no. They do not mention Holocaust denial at all. It really becomes interesting when it's green, because it's actually the source which supports Holocaust denial, which actually tells, okay, Holocaust either didn't happen or it was made by evil Jews to actually complicate poor Germans. And again, I'm reminding you, it's top 10 results. We didn't actually went to the top 50 results or top 100 results. It's really something that you're having on the very first page of your search results when you're searching for the Holocaust. And actually having DuckDuckGo, Yandex, and Bing reporting this kind of denialism. And what is really said about Yandex, because I really like this search engine for many reasons, but not for this one. And the problem is that it's actually quite consistent in reporting Holocaust denialism, especially for the Russian queries. It did it in February 2020. It keeps doing it May 2021. It would be very interesting to see what it would be now if we would have money. Maybe we would. And then reference to the current time is basically what we talked with Vicky yesterday about the instrumentalization. Again, what is really interesting is quite some variety here, which again affects quite pronouncedly how you would connect or not connect Holocaust to the current events. Conclusions. So, can the algorithm remember the Holocaust? My answer is yes, definitely. I'm really a big fan of algorithms. We can do almost everything with algorithms. The question is, are we really satisfied with the way algorithms remember Holocaust? And I definitely think it's something that we should talk and seek much more. There are some obvious reasons for the concerns. Holocaust denial. It's not something that should happen in the mainstream platform, like the search engine. I'm pretty sure that the majority of people here would agree with me. It's also very concerning that it actually consistent in terms of its presence in the Russian queries. Again, it's very worrisome, because it basically means that the Russian user who is searching for the Holocaust is very likely to receive information about Holocaust denial already in the first page of the results, which would probably result in very skewed representation and understanding of the Holocaust. There are also less obvious reasons for concern. For instance, is the broad overview or the language-driven differences that we actually observe in those nice graphs is really what we want people to see when searching for the Holocaust? Because we definitely probably do not necessarily want to impose a single interpretation of the Holocaust, if it would be possible. Do we actually want to have such a big difference in how individual search engines represent the Holocaust? Because then it means that if I'm using Google, I have one understanding of the Holocaust. If I'm using DuckDuckGo, I have a different understanding of the Holocaust. How are we actually going to agree in our society on those matters? And finally, it is really a question that I think we have to answer at some point. If we are fine with this, it's excellent. We just would continue doing our auditing just for fun. But if we are not fine with it, that's what we're actually going to do and how we're actually going to trace those changes, because as we see on the graphs, things are changing. Shall we actually try to game the algorithm like some of the research institutions do, because they basically force to game the algorithm in order to gain visibility? Or should we actually push on the platforms in order to make them change the system, which might be actually a more sustainable solution, because gaming the algorithm is problematic. Algorithms are constantly changing. And finally, what we're actually arguing very much is that longitudinal monitoring is really very important. It would be great if we would have money, but even more important is establishing the baseline, which I think definitely is something that we need to do together with the Holocaust research community. We really need to understand what we want to say about the Holocaust and search engines and what we do not, and only then we can actually answer, I would say, consistently the question, are we satisfied with the ways how algorithms remember the Holocaust? Thank you very much.